Hello, welcome to this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with,
Clint Derringer.
and finally, after an off season to forget of way too much drama, we are back to talking Michigan football. Well, Clint, how do you feel heading into this season?
Well, for as much as possible, I'm hoping that it can be a fresh start. Almost all new coaching staff. A young team in terms of leadership and at the critical skill positions, and you know, a lot of turnover. Throughout the whole program and through the athletic department. So I'm hoping that we can kind of close the book on the recent past and build something going forward, especially with a really young quarterback still just 18 years old, Bryce Underwood, and doesn't turn 19 until close to the first game. And, you know, just gotta get off to a good start in the Whittingham era, I think, and really try to get the sour taste out of everybody's mouth.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to is, there's a lot of criticism directed at Underwood right now. And I really think that people need to give him a little bit of grace. There was so much off the field drama that he was navigating as a freshman quarterback. Here you're adding to that, he's working with a whole new coaching staff, finally has a quarterback coach dedicated to him. And I'm really looking for him to elevate his game this season. But, you know, again, we can focus on, all of the postseason drama, but we need to focus on that the players were at the center of it. And probably no player had more pressure on him and more pressure on him coming into this season than Bryce. And really hoping that now that the off the field stuff is done, that he can just focus on being the best quarterback he can be and elevating his game.
Yeah, and it's kind of the cliche big jump from freshman year to sophomore year, that is expected. So not only does he need to improve, he needs to improve by a great deal and kind of stay ahead of expectations in the learning curve. And I think there's already, some folks are already kind of sharpening the pitchforks to start pointing the finger at Bryce Underwood as the reason for whatever chance or lack of success or underwhelming performance that may come. So it is a really heavy set of pressure that the sophomore quarterback's going to be holding. But that's what you sign up for. Number one recruit in the country, and a lot of money involved now with NIL, and that brings additional expectations for a lot of people. So the noise is going to be as loud as always. But the good news is he'll be judged based on how well he plays football, and he's really good at playing football.
And I think that's the point, right? Anytime a player puts on the maize and blue and goes under center or takes the snap from center, shotgun snap, depending on what play we're going to be running, there is a huge amount of pressure on him. And you and I have talked about on the podcast for years about you see some quarterbacks handle the pressure and ascend and become great. And you just see the pressure eat some players up. Okay. I think one of the things that I've learned in, being able to follow the program and cover the program the way we do is that there's a perception that when you're the quarterback, you're the big man on campus and that, everything is unicorns and rainbows, right? And it's just not the case, right? There is a ton of pressure. And as you said, I mean, Bryce is definitely being well compensated, under the new NIL rules. But you got to remember, he's a kid. There's a lot of pressure. And, we have seen the pressure you know, really take its toll on players. When I think back to players who've really just, handled the pressure, performed well on and off the field, of course, in recent history, we can look at J.J. McCarthy, right? But again, J.J. McCarthy was the outlier and led the team to a national championship. And that's the expectation here at Michigan. So definitely lots of things to watch with Bryce, but you know, lots of reasons to think that he's going to get better. But as you said, the pressure on him is really, um, I would say it's really next level at this point. I mean, compared to previous quarterbacks, and I think part of that is again the NIL deal, and part of it is coming off the recent national championship here at Michigan. But again, like you said, it's what you sign up for. What things do you look to see him improve on? Like what particular skills, did you see glimpses of last year that you'd like to see more of this season?
The easiest answer there is his ability to run the ball, um, designed run plays, especially. The last offensive staff just did not believe in running the quarterback much, if at all. And when he did, they weren't particularly well timed or well planned, plays. So the new staff, that's a big part of what Michigan is going to do this year. I think he's going to probably run intentional quarterback run plays, 8 to 10 times a game, and especially in the red zone, where it's awfully tough to stop a player of Bryce Underwood's size at the goal line if he's got a head of steam and puts his shoulder pads down and leans forward. It was a really, really effective for a long time in the college game, and Cam Newton, who was the quarterback who I think physically Bryce reminds me of the most. Um, Cam Newton made a really good living and had an MVP season in the NFL, by making himself kind of a red zone threat. So he's going to be a big help down there, and that's going to help open up more run game um, attacks in the red zone. So that's, using that skill set. In terms of actually passing the ball, he is it's the fundamentals. It's about kind of pocket presence, being able to calm his feet when he's throwing from the pocket, and kind of keeping a solid platform underneath him, whether he's throwing from in the pocket or outside the pocket. Right. So he's really, really talented and has a very strong arm, and is, it's been kind of a point of emphasis in the offseason with Michigan's coaching staff kind of talking about his accuracy throwing on the run, which is great, but he needs to be more accurate on all of the throws, especially some of the gimmies, touch passes in the flat, and being able to get the ball to your running backs out wide on swing routes. So I think all of that it is pretty pure fundamental basics, and it starts with footwork. And I think the game is going to kind of slow down for him in his sophomore year, um, and he's going to be able to make better decisions. He's going to be able to keep his eyes down the field. He's going to be able to make some kind of scramble plays, extend plays when he escapes pressure, and just have a calmer presence with the ball in his hand. Part of that is just age and experience, and then it's also about coaching. To not have a dedicated quarterback coach on the staff last year, when the most important position almost on any football team, 99.9% of football teams, the quarterback is the most important position. To not have a dedicated coach at the position was, kind of malpractice that you and I didn't talk about outwardly probably enough. And it was one of the most clear signs that the Sharon Moore coaching staff was not, um, really well put together in terms of trying to develop the players to their maximum potential, which is what the program has to be about, is getting the most out of every single player that you can, and together trying to put together a run and have really great season, and playing championship football and beating your rivals, and making the college football playoffs. So to really kind of ignore the most important player or asset in your program was significant malpractice. So I expect this year to feel very different in terms of solid fundamentals, better decision making, and a calmer, wiser presence for Bryce Underwood outside of just being 1 year older.
The thing that I'm looking for, and we did talk about this a lot last year, and you stole my thunder a little bit, is I want to see the happy feet be less happy, right? Everything comes from fundamentals, footwork, and I feel like last year he was reined in from running, but his natural tendency was to want to run, right? And you could almost see, I was breaking down tape, in the last week watching a lot of the games from last season, and you know, his shoulders would stay, in pretty good form, and as you look down at his feet, you could see his feet kind of, almost just wanting to take off, right? And you can see it in how some of the passes were not super accurate. So, and again, I think it comes down to, real basic fundamental quarterback play. The things that coaches teach, from the junior high level up. Obviously, there's a lot more pressure, a lot more eyes on you, and much bigger hits that you want to avoid when you're in college. But you could see that he's an incredibly gifted player. You can see that he's extremely talented, and you know, as counterintuitive as this is, um, okay, from spring practice on, it has been communicated that they're going to let Bryce run more. Okay, I think that is a great goal, but I I really just want to see him just play basic quarterback, fundamental, throw the ball, do your progressions, and I know he can run. You get what I'm saying? Like I know he can run, but I really want to just see that he can basically run through the progressions and whatever kind of offense we're going to see this year, which we can't really look back at too much on film from last season because the wholesale changes in the program. But I, you know, I and again, it seems counterintuitive, but I'd almost want to see him go out in the first quarter and just say, "Listen, you will not run. Okay, you will you will run the progressions. You will go down. You will pass, or you will hand off, or you will throw incompletions. Like take the run out of it, and just let him focus on basic fundamentals. And again, I know he can run, right? What I don't know is that if he can be that calming presence, not only in the huddle, but under with rushers coming at him.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know. Um, I don't think that you're going to, I don't think that you're going to build a pocket passer by eliminating the threat of quarterback run. I think you help Bryce the most by making the defense defend all of the weapons and tools that are at his disposal. So, um, creating space, also still a young group of wide receivers on this team. So I think really whatever the coaching staff can do to put Bryce in a few clear cut situations where maybe the reads are a little bit more simple early in the season, this or that kind of binary decisions, not having to read a 1, 2, 3 kind of a progression. And when there is a progression to read, right, it should be kind of natural to kind of physically where he's looking when they move the pocket, right? You want to kind of get everything right into his line of vision. and build upon success so that by the time you're in the middle of the season and then toward the end of the season, you've got a much more layered or complex set of passing concepts at your disposal. If you kind of try something and it doesn't work and you toss it and then try the next thing and hope, well, maybe we'll run him because he's struggling to throw the ball. If it's helter skelter like that, I don't know that he will develop at the rate that he needs to in this very important sophomore year. So I I'm fine with kind of simplified concepts, especially early on in the season, and build and build and build upon success and make as many of the passing plays and the run plays and the play action at, styles and visual cues kind of look as similar as possible to the defense, and I think that helps them the most.
The nice thing is that not only do we have some real talent at receiver, but we're absolutely stacked at running back, right? And I'm hoping that we're going to see an offense much more in the mold of the one that won a national championship here, where people were screaming for JJ to throw more, right? But it was really a run first, pass when necessary, and JJ ran just enough. Now, obviously, I think we're going to see Underwood run more, but I'm going to come back to it. I really want to see him, and I'm not saying rejigger the entire offense and then, flip the switch, halfway through. Uh, we're not talking about a Rocky Balboa, uh,
Hmm.
you know, box right-handed and switch back to left-handed, right? Go southpaw later or something, right? Um, I'm just saying that I'd really like to show me that you can run the part of the playbook where you are looking to pass first and um, you know manage the offense, right? Be the guy that can go down and hit some progressions and do that. Because again, we know he can run. The concern that I have, and I watched a ton of his high school tape, is that he is so talented and so fast that he could just outrun people, right? And I again, no doubt, you know, when you're that talented at the high school level, you can just out athletic people. And here we're going to need to see something different. But again, I think a lot of this too is we really haven't. We're looking at what Utah ran under Coach Witt, there, and I think we're going to see something similar here. But you're definitely going to have to rely on the talent and the gifts that Bryce has. Um, and it's weird though because and I hate to take a lot from spring practice because you and I always say the best thing that can happen in spring practice is nobody get hurt. You're not going to see a lot of the offense there. But went back and looked at spring practice. Have gone back and I've read a lot and watched tape of Utah, and it's interesting. I'm really excited to see what this offense is going to do with our stable of running backs and receivers. I think we've been talking a lot the last few years about the Michigan defense, and the defense is going to have to be great, going to have to step up, but I'm really interested to see how they're going to put the pieces they have in play this season.
And which position group is probably the most important with all of this? But it seems like it's always the last one that we talk about.
Well, I think you're going to say the offensive line, right?
It's the offensive line, and they're going to be again the guys that were playing last year are going to be a year older, which is good. Sounds like there's been some tweaks physically in the weight room. Um, a different philosophy and different measurements, measuring different lifts and numbers, and that was a big turnaround for what Coach Witt wanted to see. Was he was a little bit unimpressed by what what the guys were doing when they walked in. So and then a lot of talent still that was well recruited by the previous coaching staff, and they stayed together. And a lot of big guys at tackle, and I'm really, really maybe outside of Bryce Underwood in year two with all of the X factor and expectations that comes there. I want to see Andrew Babalola play. I want to see what this line is going to look like, and can it be as good as those guys in 21, 22, and into 23. And I think really that's the measuring stick for this offense, because all of that makes it so much easier for the quarterback, for Bryce Underwood. You said there's talent and depth at running back, and that's true. But if Kyle Whittingham and the offensive staff have their way, right, Michigan's going to be churning it on the ground, 200 and plus, and pushing toward 300 yards of offense on the ground, and just grinding teams to dust physically. That was the most fortunate piece of the transition from Sharon Moore to Kyle Whittingham, is that Utah in the last 5 to 10 years has been a very, very similar physical program on offense, and I'm really, really excited to see what Coach Harding can do on the offensive line. Everybody's got rave reviews for his work and experience with offensive linemen, and I think that is what you and I will probably be talking about when we're recapping games 1, 2, 3, because it's almost like it's been undersold because of all of the focus that's on Bryce Underwood, understandably. But this offensive line is going to remind people quickly about what the real identity of this team is going to be.
So, just to touch on the strength and conditioning a little bit, listen, I'm super excited to hear all the rave reviews of strength and conditioning. Okay. Um, I, um, I want to put it in a little bit of context, right? Um, Again, there was so much bad feelings and so much off the field drama that it seems to me that, you know, a lot of the new changes are, and the raving about the changes are more of a breath of fresh air, like just cleaning the palate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to utter these words, but I have to, right? So when Rich Rod came, okay, we heard tons and tons about Mike Barwis, right? And the players raved about his strength and conditioning. And I got to tell you, the players looked amazing, okay? The players looked like MMA, guys. Unfortunately, they played like MMA guys in football. And they were in great condition, but it didn't necessarily translate to great performance on the field. And we talk, you and I during the season, we do talk about the offensive and defensive line because we know that's where the games won and lost. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Every head coach that's come in here has told us that. I mean, Brady Hoke, Jim Harbaugh. Now, to varying degrees, they were able to achieve that success on the line, right? But you and I know that that's where it happens, right? So, one of the things that I've noticed about strength and conditioning, right, is that coach spends more time with the players than almost every other coach, right? He's got to motivate them year round, and that is an incredibly key position. So I'm super excited that we're hearing these rave reviews about, how much stronger the team is. But I'm also taking it a little bit with a grain of salt because, like I said, I've heard this before, right? Um, I'm glad that the players are excited. If you think back, you had a program of strength and conditioning that was very similar to the one that was here the last several years of Harbaugh, 2 years of Sharon Moore. So hey, breath, a fresh breath of air, clean slate, new workouts, awesome, right? So I'm glad to hear that, but I'm also kind of putting it in context. Now, when you talk about the offensive line, right? Um, again, everyone, everybody is raving about that. The players are raving about it. And I think that's the thing that gets me the most excited is that, you have a guy coming in who has a track record of taking talent, molding it to put players in a position to not only be successful in college, but elevate to the next level. And as you said, Michigan has the talent. Okay. And, we have to look back. Remember, when Michigan went on its national championship run, one of the reasons it did is it was able to keep its offensive linemen here when they could have gone to the NFL, right? You basically kind of restricted the growth of the guys underneath them because they were backed up. They didn't go to the NFL. They stayed here and you know um, went on that national championship run. So in Sharon Moore's first year, you had the great exodus to the NFL, and you had guys really coming together. I think if anything, I'm more disappointed that the offensive line wasn't better last year. And again, we can point to all the drama off the field. So, you mentioned, you're looking for the offensive line to elevate this year. I think between the new coaching staff and the talent and them having the ability to gel, I think as great as the running backs might be, and they'll definitely get the press, the position group that is in position to show the most this season, the most improvement is the offensive line. And I think it was great that you called that out because I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, and I'm on top of how fortunate I feel to that Michigan found, Kyle Whittingham on the tail end of firing Sharon Moore. Both coordinators, I think, are A+ fit for the personnel and the previous system. I mean, it's not exactly the same. It's not the same family of defensive system, but Jay Hill was very, very successful at BYU, and I'm really, really looking forward to what he can do with, I think, a the amount of depth up front in the defensive line, especially on the edge for Michigan, in conjunction with the ridiculous amount of depth at the corner position. There's so much that Michigan's going to be able to do with personnel and matching what I think they're going to be able to be very creative in taking away what the other team wants to do, number one overall, and it's going to feel a little bit like some of the defenses of the past under Mike McDonald and in the national championship run. And please, 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 to the football gods, wherever they may be, please let Rod Moore have a fully healthy, successful return to the field and let that kid play a full season and finally get some closure on his Michigan career, um, because he's really battled and grinded through such adversity. He deserves to be able to kind of lead the team one more time and kind of make his presence known right in the middle of what's going to be just a total ball of knives, and it's going to be attacking offensives from all directions because of the different looks that they're going to be able to give to guys. And somebody really brilliant in the middle of that, like Rod Moore, is going to be it's going to be a nightmare for quarterbacks and for offensive coordinators to play Michigan. I really feel that way this year.
You know, back to the offensive line. It was odd the last several years because Sharon Moore had obviously done a great job bringing that offensive line along prior to becoming head coach. And you really saw the O line kind of, I think the nicest thing I can say is stagnate, right? Um, I really like Grant Newsome, but one of the things that happened last year is we heard that, you know, they had to, give some extra attention to the offensive line and do some things to shore things up. And, eh, again, with all the other, malpractice that we talked about, um, you know, really the offense seemed to have some serious issues. Now, I do want to address, I brought up, Rich Rod. I want to make a huge distinction here, okay? The coaches that have come with Coach Witt are at a complete higher level than the coaches that Rich Rod brought with him. And I think, I was sitting here, in the preseason thinking, well, there are things that kind of remind me, new coach, new system. Um, I'm not completely sure that either Coach Witt or Rich Rod fully appreciate the differences coming here. Okay, that can be something that I think is similar, but they both are, apparently both, you know, they've come in and the players have rediscovered the weight room, right? That's something that's similar. But something that's completely different is that when you look at the coaches that have come in with Coach Whittingham, they're top drawer. Okay, everyone is players are raving about they have a history of developing talent, and I think that is one of the things that makes me feel optimistic about this season. Right? You can swing back and forth, being super excited, having concern, having a little bit of anxiety, but that Coach Whittingham has been able to build this core of highly qualified coaches around him and that they followed him, right? Um, Knowing that this is going to be a big challenge. Okay, this is going to be a ginormous challenge, and they're all up for it. And I think looking back to the Rich Rod era, um, not only was I disappointed, obviously, at how the program turned out under Rich Rod, but I remember being really unimpressed by many of the coaches. Okay, and I was thinking back, listening to the press conferences during the spring, and completely impressive group of men. Focused on not only making the program successful, but wanting to see the players be successful on and off the field. Um, there were some remarks in the spring about how the coaches actually care if they go to class, and I think that's the thing that probably pissed me off the most, Clint, is that
Mm.
out of all the off the field drama, and again, let's just you know let that go, let that sit. That was about the worst slap in the face. That you know maybe guys weren't being encouraged to be on time as much as they should have, and maybe they weren't. Maybe they were doing different workouts, or maybe not being focused on workouts. But the idea that the commitment to academics was not um, locked down at the end of the Sharon Moores, you know, that was kind of there were a lot of last straws, but that was just the slap on the way out. So, um, considering the struggle and the position that Michigan was put in, um, you know, we are way better off. And you know, I, Clint, we talked about, like, were we as critical of Sharon as we should have been? We definitely had doubts, and anyone can go back and listen to our podcast, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, if I had to describe it one way, it was kind of all last season I was white knuckling it and kind of hoping that Sharon would straighten up and fly straight, right? Just you know, focus on football and do something with this amazing opportunity and this team that you have, right? But it was not trending in the right way. I did not have super high hopes heading into this if this would have been Sharon's third season. Whatever doubts and concerns I have about Coach Whittingham coming in, they're nothing compared to the doubts and fears I would have had if Sharon Moore was still here.
Yeah, and the I cannot believe the difference in leadership and culture from the mountaintop of the national championship season and our praise for how that team could block out all of the noise and drama and distraction at almost a superhuman level. And um, once that leadership group was gone, the drama didn't decrease, it increased. And I think it all swallowed most of the players and the coaches and the whole team, and I think while that that really strong culture that we praised over and over and over again was kind of forged in some of that chaotic fire from 2023. Um, I, the program at least kind of felt like they could always survive in that kind of chaotic fire, and that team was the exception, not the rule. Right? You do not want to have your team swallowed up by off field drama and issues and lack of focus and everything except what's going on in between the lines. And it was really a quick fall from grace, um, because I think some of the pillars of leadership um, that we certainly heaped a lot of praise on, but it's not it's not reasonable to think that any real normal team um, could kind of withstand all of that craziness. And I mean, we're saying all of this as if that team was 3-9 or 2-10. That Michigan team only lost two Big Ten games and finished with 9 wins. There were, I'm looking at it now, 5 teams in the Big Ten were finished 9-4. They were in that second tier of almost playoff caliber teams in the Big Ten, which is crazy because of how far away from championship level they felt at different points in the season.
Well, we talk a lot about culture, and it's probably one of the things that I'm most interested in. You know, what was odd is, after Coach Harbaugh left, there were the um, lip service to the culture, right? Like guys would talk about the culture like it was still there. And listen, I hoped it was still there, right? Um, I remember, you have conversations with coaches about do you want to coach in college or pro, right? And many of the coaches will say the advantage you have in pro is you don't have to grind 365 days a year, okay? Coach Harbaugh loved grinding 365 days a year, but he acknowledged that he was the exception, right? And I always wondered, as unique and amazing as the culture was that developed when Michigan won the national championship, could it exist without him and many of the coaches that left with him? And the answer is a resounding it can't. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't build a new culture, but the thing that really excites me about Coach Whittingham and the coaches he's brought in is they do come from a strong culture. It's going to be different, but I think that I think that you know they're not just going to do things just to do things. There's a reason for it. And one of the things that came out during spring practice is that there's a horn that blows completely through the entirety of Schembechler Hall that a meeting's starting, right? And meeting starting, everybody knows, don't be late, right? And there's a question of it actually rings before the meeting starts. And I remember when Coach Carr was here, he would say, on time is late, right? And it was kind of funny, haha. Well, it's kind of that old school thing of, hey, be here, be doing what you need to do, and it's all comes down to culture, okay? And if you have a strong culture, you will, you know, the players will improve. The players will be part of it, and players who don't want to be part of that culture won't be part of it, and they will. It's kind of a self-selection thing. I feel like what happened under the last 2 years of Sharon, and let's be clear, he is the author and the villain. Okay, you can't have a culture when the person leading the culture is, not living up to it. Okay, and you just can't. Okay, that's not how it works. So, you know, definitely some things here that we can be excited about, but there's a lot of issues that we will not have this year. We won't have, some of the behavior that you and I saw in some of the press conferences of the players kind of, you know, being lax with discipline, shall we say. Um, and again, some of the things that I saw, and I'm not special. They were picked up on the broadcast last year of players kind of flipping the other team off. I mean, just high school shit. Okay, just come on, you know. So on one hand, Sharon would say, well, we're going to focus on the field, and then the players, a completely different thing happening. So I'm very happy that that is in our rear view.
Yeah, I'll repeat it again. Michigan's very, very fortunate to be where they are in terms of Kyle Whittingham being the head coach and the staff that he was able to bring and the talent that was able to stay. Um, a couple guys transferred in who are going to be impact players, and I know we'll talk much more about specific position groups when we do our game by game preview episode coming up here. But um, I still have this overwhelming feeling of good fortune, honestly, that Michigan is very, very lucky to be where they are right now, coming off of the really, really poor culture and off the field drama and unnecessary, unforced errors all the way through the program and really through the athletic department of the last couple of years.
You mentioned Rod Moore. I wrote a blog post a few years ago about here are the people that I'd really like to read a book by, right? Like people who were embedded in the program, who've seen multiple eras. And I think I need to add Rod Moore to that list. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
things that he's seen, good, bad, hopefully, again, going to be ending on a high note here. But, he's seen some things. And I'm really happy for him. As you said, I'm glad to see him get another chance to end strong. And if there's anybody who deserves a healthy, successful season, it's Rod Moore. Good guy, Michigan man, and looking forward to him having a great season and leading the Michigan defense as it reestablishes itself.
Yeah, he is also the last vestige of that leadership group from 2023. Like you said it perfectly. He's seen some things. He's been to the top of the mountain, and he's seen the kind of the belly of the beast, and the business part of this particular sport. And he's seen a bunch of other people crash and burn, and he knows what success looks like. And I hope that he gets to enjoy success on the field, but also I hope for Michigan that he kind of returns to his form as just a critical leader in between the lines, and again putting his expertise and experience in the middle of a really flexible and attacking defense is going to be really, really, really fun to watch. and the way that we felt about Mikey Sainer still a couple of years ago, I think there's an opportunity here for us to be talking about Rod Moore in that way of just kind of the maestro of a really good defense in collaboration with Jay Hill, the coordinator.
All right. Well, player and coach availability starts this week. So we will have some clips as the players and coaches start gearing up for the upcoming season. Again, super excited to be talking about football and not the other just silliness that we've had to deal with the last year. And I went to the Michigan National Championship in basketball this year, and it was great, Clint. It was great, but it was not as great as the football national championship. And I'm hungry for another one. So,
Mm.
really hoping that Coach Whittingham is here and, we are building the foundation to watch the program ascend again and really looking forward to, um, just this team elevating above, the stuff that they've gone through. And, thinking of Jordan Marshall, running back, thinking of Rod Moore, thinking about these players who, as you mentioned, Rod Moore has been to the mountaintop and now last year he's at the bottom of the valley, right? And, he had a rough couple years. It would have been horrific for him to end his career last season with all that, silliness. So to see him come back, see a player like Jordan Marshall who came here, thinking that Michigan was, going to be on top and continue being on top. Looking forward to seeing players like that coming through, and you know, looking forward to being back in the big house soon.
Yeah, it won't be long. And now is kind of putting the final touches on a lot of the numbers homework here, so that we can try to try to make some comparisons and what we expect out of this particular version of the Wolverines and what the schedule shapes up to be. A lot of home cooking early in the season here, and then really, really tough down the home stretch in November. So looking forward to putting all that together and talking not just football players and program and culture, but actually thinking about the games and making some predictions. That's the kind of stuff that I really love spending time on.
We always split the season up in quarters. And I was telling a friend of mine who's actually a former Michigan football player that I do some work with, in, post football work. And, I was telling him, I'm like, man, the fourth quarter this year is going to be really interesting, meaning those last three games.
Yeah.
Um, we will know what we have. Um, well, Clint, looking forward to covering everything with you again. Um, do you have any final words for this podcast?
No, I took a long off season of kind of shaking my head at the program and being disappointed, but it's nice to be here in August and thinking about the football season with optimism again and building something new and trying to lead with kind of a sense of gratitude for the quick turnaround in terms of leadership and program and rebuilding a culture here. Um, we're very lucky for that. So I'm going to enjoy the season starting here in the big house soon.
I well said. Um, I am going to do my best to um, look forward to when we're down in Columbus at the end of this season. I want to be there when the bus drops off the Michigan Wolverines and Coach Whittingham, and I want to see him experience the love of our Buckeye rivals. I'll just leave it at that. I think that's going to be an interesting baptism of fire. So, um, looking forward to that. Looking forward to another great season. Um, and that's going to do it for this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan.
Along with Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
The tradition, the history here is incredible. I mean, it's as steeped as any program in the country, maybe the most in that aspect. And Michigan football was before I got here and after I leave is Michigan football. And so I'm really more a custodial role here and just making sure I'm not here to change any of that tradition or history. Put our own stamp on the program and our own way of doing things, yeah. But as far as I'm very respectful and very aware of all the tradition and history here, and I don't have the right, nor should I have the right to alter that or change that.
Thank you for listening to the umgoblue.com podcast. All rights reserved.